Good evening, everybody, and welcome. A warm welcome to those here in person in Duke Street, and a warm welcome to those of you watching online. My name is Roger Hillier. I'm the chair of the Friends of Richmond Park, and it's great to have so many of you here today for our talk. It's great to be in this central Richmond location because we are just a few yards from the old Station Hotel in Richmond, where the Friends of Richmond Park had our very first meeting in 1961. But this location of Duke Street is new to us. So Richmond Park, as many of you know, it's not just a local asset, it's a national and international asset. Royal Park, National Nature Reserve, Site of Special Scientific Interest, and so much more. And the Friends of Richmond Park exist to help conserve and protect the extraordinary Richmond Park and to encourage people to understand and appreciate it. We have thousands of members, and their support enables us to fund projects for conservation and education. And I know many of you here are indeed members of the Friends of Richmond Park. This evening, we're focusing on one of Richmond Park's greatest treasures, its trees. The park has around 130,000 trees, including about 1,300 ancient and veteran trees of international importance. And these veterans, as many of you know, support an astonishing range of wildlife, fungi, insects, birds, bats, and they inspire us through their beauty, longevity, and also the myths and legends that have surrounded trees for centuries. Trees also have a powerful presence in art, which brings us to our speaker, Tim Craven. Tim trained in fine art and conservation of paintings. He then worked for 37 years at Southampton City Art Gallery in conservation, collections, management, and as its curator. Tim is currently chair of the Friends of Southampton Museum, Archives and Galleries. In fact, he and I have just been chatting about the role of Friends groups. Tim has never stopped painting, and in 2013 he founded the Arborealists, a group of European artists who make trees their central theme. They've staged many exhibitions and publications, and built a reputation for exploring trees in all their variety and significance. Tonight, Tim will take us on a journey through the history of trees in British art. The art critic John Berger, in his series Ways of Seeing, said the way we see things is affected by what we know or believe. After tonight, I hope you'll find your walks in Richmond Park enriched, seeing its trees with fresh eyes and deeper appreciation. So it's a great pleasure to welcome our speaker, Tim Craven.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Can you all hear me? Yes. Excellent. This is Craven Park, no relation. It's just the west of Newbury, privately owned, and like Richmond Park, it's steeped in history. There's loads of ancient and veteran trees here. There are more ancient trees in Britain than the whole of Western Europe put together. Britain has always loved its trees. In medieval times, and for hundreds, if not thousands of years, much of the country looked a bit like this. It was known as pastoral woodland. If you were an artist in this country, you couldn't miss the trees. Now, it'd be great to start our story at the beginning of the modern era of Western art, which of course is the Renaissance, which begins around, the 1400s, 14th century. But where are the Brits? They're not there. Of course, it starts in Italy, went its way up to Northern Europe, and the Low Countries, Germany with Dürer and so on, is a hugely powerful element of the Renaissance. But the English Channel, a proven defence against foreign invasion since William the Conqueror, is also a defence against cultural ideas. It took a long time for Renaissance to arrive in Britain. It's the latter part of the 16th century, and it's not in the visual arts where it flourishes, it's in literature, with Shakespeare at its pinnacle. If you were a monarch or an aristocrat in the 16th century and you wanted your portrait painted, there weren't any Brits good enough. I mean, Nicholas Hilliard had a reputation beyond these shores, but Henry VIII had to find Holbein. Charles I found Anthony van Dyck, Rubens's major pupil, Antwerp. And of course, Van Dyck had influence on British portrait painters right up in the early 19th century, hugely important. Charles II, Peter Lely, Sir Peter Lely, and Queen Anne, Godfrey Kneller. It's not until the 1730s that the English school of painting really gets started, and William Hogarth, not a tree painter, is the first English artist of European stature. But, quite remarkably, under 100 years from then, you arrive at Turner and Constable, Britain's world-class greatest artists. And I don't think it's an accident. All the stars were aligned. They arrived, not just one, but two artists of that prominence, with the arrival of the Romantic movement. And of all the movements, it's Romanticism that's the best fit for the British psyche in the northern mists. And Romanticism arrives, it comes out of Germany, first discovered or first announced in Dresden in the Stragel brothers' magazine, The Athenaeum, although it starts in literature, then morphs into all sorts of art forms, including the visual arts. And, of course, the Anglo-Saxons came from Germany, so it's in our DNA, a fact not lost on Hitler. We share romantic ideas with the Germans. So the English School of Art, where do they look to for their inspiration? They look across the water, across the North Sea, to the Low Countries, to Holland, the new young republic just thrown off the shackles of the Spanish Empire. And the young Dutch Republic is hugely successful, Protestant, amasses an extraordinarily powerful navy, which bring in the spice trade, and they amass a huge amount of money. And that kickstarts what's called the golden age of Dutch art in the 17th century. There is an affinity between great navies and booms in art. In fact, the time of Turner and Constable, you have, Nelson and Trafalgar, for instance. And all this extra money went, it kickstarts art as well, which is why the Dutch accelerate that, and the main patron being the church before becomes more secular, the invention of new subject matter, including portraits, interiors, urban scenes, and landscape. And Jacob van Ruysdael is the preeminent Dutch landscape painter, and he's the first artist to paint trees naturalistically, if you like. And after a trip to Germany in 1650, his work becomes more dramatic, more heroic, with great dramatic skies, and he spawns a lot of pupils, such as Hobbema, and landscape becomes a major feature. So these are the art. In fact, he had influence not on the British Romantic artists, but also the Barbizon School in France, the Hudson River School later on in America. Hugely far-reaching influence to art. So we come to our first English tree painter, Thomas Gainsborough. Famous painting, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. Born in Sudbury in Suffolk. His first love is for landscape, but he can't make it pay. So he has to turn to portraiture, which is where the money is, moves to Bath, then to London, and that's how we know him. He was one of the most important British artists of the 18th century. Together with Richard Wilson, they are known as the fathers of English landscape. He painted quickly with a light palette and confident brushwork, with thin paint. He was a founder member of the Royal Academy in 1769. He's technically expert and experimental. And what he's really good at, because he's so good at landscape, is merging figures in their background, which is why this painting is so brilliant. That's what his preeminent achievement is. For relaxation, he often painted landscapes at night on his off days, often by the candlelight with stones and mirrors and broccoli, little dioramas he'd make to paint from. But he worked from observation more than from formula. So this is one of his treescapes, his landscapes, and you can see that trees are the main feature there. This is by William Gilpin, the famous vicar of Boulder. William Gilpin came from a family of artists. His brother was Story Gilpin, a well-known sporting artist. He read theology at Oxford, became a curate in London. He then taught at Cheam School, one of the oldest schools in the country, and because the head teacher was lackadaisical, he took over the headship, was amazingly modern in his approach, and a former pupil gave him the living at Boulder in the New Forest. I've been to his grave. It's a lovely, lovely place. And being an artist as well, he would travel the country and was famous for promoting what became the picturesque movement, part of the Romantic movement. And he would travel up the Wye Valley, Lake District, and write treatises about painting the perfect picture. Picturesque means worthy of a painting. Worthy of a painting. And he would say that, you need the blue hills, roughness and variety, bubbling brooks, woodland, farmsteads, sheep and their shepherds, and ruins elevated scene. There's nothing greater than the ruins of a castle to give your picture a bit of status. And he said that if what you're looking at isn't quite perfect, you can move that tree, you can move that building or whatever, which we know as artist license. And he championed what became the picturesque, which became very popular in this country. And trees are often used in his work as framing devices, like this tree over here. So this is a painting by Paul Sandby, born in Nottingham. He followed his brother Thomas down to the military drawing department in the Tower of London and learnt his trade there. And he was later appointed draftsman to the survey of the military road to Fort George after the Battle of Culloden, when the Jacobites were finally defeated and they rampaged up there. And he started to make, he was designing bridges and routes and so on. But he's also made a lot of topographical drawings. And he is known as the father of English watercolour. So this is a watercolour, but this is unusual in that it is obviously an ancient tree. And as I said, Britain loved its trees, often myths and stories and legends around these trees. So that even in these days, they were valued as part of the landscape. So this tree here is an early tree portrait by Sandby. He would later travel the length and breadth of the UK, and in the 18th century with the French wars, it was difficult for you to travel abroad, so that the travellers, started to explore their own country, Wales, the Lake District, and the sort of rougher northern parts. And it was Sandby the first one to make pictures of these areas and publish aquatints and etchings to popularise them. So he is, a part of our story. And then we come on to, he kick-starts the English early 19th century watercolour school, which, I think we have a sort of international reputation for. And the best of these is John Sell Cotman, of which this is one of his studies featuring trees. Born in Norwich, went to the grammar school. His father was a silk merchant. He went and trained down at in London, Dr. Munro, and he would have met Turner there, and Gertin, Peter de Wint, and other watercolourists who become famous later on. And in 1803 to 5, he went up and stayed with the Bransbury family, the Cholmondeley family, up in Bransbury Hall, up in North Yorkshire, where he did a series of work up the River Greeter in North Yorkshire, which is quite jungly. I've been up there myself, and this is one of them. And a lot of them have these gorgeous tree shapes here. And there's a very fine collection of Cotmans in the Castle Museum in Norwich, and he became president of the Norwich School of Painters. And they were their main inspiration are the Dutch 17th century artists, including Old Crome. And in the 1820s, Cotman embarks on a series of small oil paintings. In fact, his earlier oil paintings aren't very good. They're quite clunky, but these are different again. And the subject he uses for this experimental and developmental style are trees. This is one of them in the Castle Museum. He's using a series of almost abstract touches of a fresh palette of blues and greens and yellows with mixed small sketchy strokes, almost prefiguring Impressionism. And it's the tree that he's using. Because of the wonderful shapes that trees give you, I think, that inspired him to. This is a lovely, lovely little painting. So now we come to an early Turner, a watercolour of, again, of a tree portrait. Born close to Charing Cross, never lost his London accent. His father was a wig maker and barber, so sort of lower middle class, but a working man. He was an extraordinary, talented child prodigy, and they were selling his drawings in his father's barber shop when he was 13. He was entered in the Royal Academy Schools of Art at the age of 14 and was exhibiting at the Royal Academy at the age of 15. I mean, extraordinary. He was that talented. And he showed there, yes, in the Royal Academy of 1790. He travelled widely, he loved travelling, and after his initial training on topographical work and architectural work, and he'd always say his true master was an artist you've probably never heard of, Thomas Moulton. He then changed his style and became known as the painter of light, luminous imagery, brilliant colours, and a precursor of Impressionism. He was never made President of the Royal Academy because I think today you might say he was somewhere on the autistic scale. He was a recluse, difficult person, never liked selling his paintings. He amassed a lot of money, he was good at making money, making prints and so on. Rather uncouth, so he was never knighted, as he should have been really, or made President of the Royal Academy. Had a chip on his shoulder. He wanted to prove that he was better than the old masters. So he'd ape Poussin or the great Dutch maritime painters to try and get one better on them. His major element, or his issue, was getting the balance between the historic event that he's depicting and the nature, the landscape that it's taking part in. Trees feature a lot, but a lot of them are non-native. They're sort of foreign because of his travelling. He loved travelling. His great critic admirer was the critic John Ruskin, who called him Britain's greatest painter of nature's moods and the atmospheres that he could conjure. Again, like Cotman, he would attend Dr. Munro's classes, who was a doctor looking after the patients in Bedlam, quite extraordinary really, and where he met Thomas Girtin. And Girtin died tragically young, I think it's probably TB, I'm not quite sure, and Turner said of him, had he lived, I would have starved. His apocryphal last words are, the sun is God. And his oppo, John Constable. Or chalk and cheese, they're chalk and cheese. Constable, middle-class family, born in East Bergholt on the Essex-Suffolk border. His father was a wealthy mill owner. He owned Flatford Mill. He owned a boat which he could put his corn in to take down to London. He had brothers, and they lived in quite a grand house. And again, like Turner, child prodigy, loved drawing. He took himself off, wandered down the River Stour and painted the local landscape, which he loved. He said, these scenes made me a painter, and I am grateful. The sound of water escaping from mill dams, willows, old rotten planks, slimy posts and brickwork, I love these things. He said, my limited and abstracted art is to be found under every hedge and in every lane, and therefore nobody thinks it worth picking up. He is producing a new art. This is quite new at the time. This is a later work. He did enter the Royal Academy and got his work accepted there, and he was 10 years behind Turner, who he knew was, the famous artist. He was, very revered and was quite wealthy. The way he made it was he suddenly got the idea how to make it the Royal Academy, and that was to scale up. He made his pictures big, which he called the six-footers, and the first success he had as sales was the White Horse in 1819, and thereon he did a series of six-footers, of which this is one. And unusually, unlike Turner, he would make full-size studies of his works, and the one in the National Gallery is a study, and they're freer, and we probably find them finer works now. He later, to suggest movement and light, he adds these little white scumbles. It's known as Constable Snow. And when he put this was first shown at the Royal Academy, people hated it. They called it spotty, because it was new. They didn't like anything new. And of course, when this painting, or when the Haywain, for us is a very hackneyed image, when that was first shown in Paris in 1825, it caused a furore. They loved it. It was extraordinary. It was something completely new. And that's what the young Impressionists, the young Monet and cohort, dived on, and so that these little white specks are, foreshadowing full-blown Impressionism. So he is a major, both Turner and Constable are major influence on the birth of the modern movement. Now, Turner and Constable, as I say, was chalk and cheese. One of them went nowhere. He just painted his backyard, which he loved, Constable, and Turner was the opposite. He loved traveling. He went down to the Mediterranean. He loved Venice. He loved Switzerland, Germany, the Alps. He couldn't have enough of it. So he brought that landscape back, and he used to paint his English scenes with Mediterranean colour, yellow. All this stuff was yellow, and people hated it. They just, and he was using chrome yellow, which is quite artificial. So he got lambasted for that. They were rivals at the stage, but they both fed on each other. But they were also fellow travellers, because together they elevated landscape, which was the bottom of the hierarchy of academic subjects, history, painting, and religious at the top, to the very top. And Turner effectively demonstrates, he doesn't say literally, but he says, you don't need all these hierarchies. Landscape can do it all. He's so good. And that's what we have given to Western art, the Romantic landscape tradition. It comes from Turner and Constable. Individually, they are great. In tandem, they are titans. Turner's gold and Constable's silver. Both amazing tree painters. The Romantic movement heralded, inspired by Turner and Constable, a whole host of other artists, including this artist here, John Martin, and this is your beloved Richmond Park. He painted it several times. He also painted other London parks. He's born in Northumberland. His nickname is Mad John Martin. He used to paint epic, massive, great paintings and display them privately and charge people to come and see them. His most famous painting was Belshazzar's Feast. They're religious history paintings, very dramatic. This is the romantic. He knew Turner, the Romantic Heights, a lovely painting, a vista through Richmond Park. And to contrast these epic paintings, ending there with these massive John Martin pictures, on the other end of the spectrum of the British Romantic movement is Blake and Turner. And on purpose, they're small, intimate, very spiritual, religious paintings. This is tiny, this is blown up huge. This is by William Blake, 1757 to 1827. He started writing very early, again, another child prodigy. He was seeing visions at the age of 10. He saw a tree full of angels, tree again. He studied intaglio engraving with James Berger, but this time it was rather old-fashioned. Things had moved on. And Berger sent him to go and draw in Westminster Abbey. So he fell in love with Gothic architecture and everything Gothic. He was thought mad by many people at the time, misunderstood as a poet, artist, and visionary. Some people called him a pre-romantic. He was very religious, but he hated organised religion. At the age of 21, he entered the Royal Academy schools, but he argued with the tutors who he disagreed with, and he invented his own relief etching technique. The lack of recognition, he had some commissions, he just about made a living. It was difficult because he was so out of kilter with the rest of English artists. He would engrave designs and illustration, for instance, for the Book of Job or Dante's Inferno, and he's famous for his visionary heads, the most famous one probably being the head of a flea. And my favourite quote, I love artist quotes from him, is, "To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." In 1820, he was commissioned by Dr. Robert Thornton to illustrate his school's version of the Pastorals of Virgil. And he did 17 tiny woodcuts, unusual for him, didn't usually go in for that. And this is one of them, the blasted oak. They're tiny. But these woodcuts had a huge impact on another artist and a whole range of future generations of artists, because it was seen by Samuel Palmer. Samuel Palmer, landscape painter, writer, is a key figure in English Romanticism. Again, a visionary, and making amazing pastoral paintings. Born in London again, he painted churches at the age of 12 in a sort of Turneresque fashion, and was showing works at the RA at the age of 14. So he had little schooling, but incredibly talented artists. And through his future father-in-law, another artist, John Linnell, he met William Blake in 1824, and he saw these woodcuts, and they had a huge impact. He said, "They are visions of little dells and nooks and corners of paradise, models of the exquisite pitch of intense poetry. I thought of their light and shade, and looking upon them, I found no word to describe it. Intense depth, solemnity, and vivid brilliancy only coldly and partially describes them. There is such a mystic and dreamy glimmer as penetrates and kindles the innermost soul, and gives complete and unreserved delight, unlike the gaudy daylight of this world." I mean, you can see he is quite affected. He discovers Shoreham Valley in Kent, which he describes, it's all built over now, sadly, he describes it as a demi-paradise, mysterious and visionary. And he rents a cottage there which, with his friends George Richmond and Edward Calvert. Together they call themselves the Ancients, and they call their cottage Rat Abbey. His disreputable father comes to live close by, and they stay there for about 8 years, painting an extraordinary series of small, often sepia dark works at night, villages, trees, copses, shepherds and their flocks, very sort of pastoral, romantic subjects. And his most famous tree painting is probably this wonderful blossom, May blossom in a garden at that time. When he showed these works to the public, they were lambasted, they were heavily criticized, so he shut them away, never showed them again to the public. And when he married Hannah in 1835, the love of his life, he moved back to London, and having a family to feed and so on, the bills to pay, he became a drawing master and painted more conventionally. He got a good reputation with his watercolours. And latterly in his life, he made a series of etchings, the Eclogues of Virgil, which would have a huge impact on other artists in the time. When he died, he was forgotten about completely. His son, A.H. Palmer, reputedly, he destroyed a lot of this Shoreham Valley stuff because he thought the public wouldn't understand it, and he didn't want to destroy his father's reputation. So reputedly, he had a 3-day bonfire. Can you imagine what he destroyed? Extraordinary. Some of it still survives. It's not until the 1926 exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum on Blake and his followers that Palmer is rediscovered. And it's not until the 1950s that his reputation gets to where it is now as a major player in Britain's Romantic movement. This is my favourite Victorian painting, really. It's called A Study in March by John William Inchbold. It's in the Ashmolean, and it's gorgeous. And he is one of the pre-Raphaelite landscape painters, the others being George Price Boyce, John Brett, and Thomas Seddon. And these have been described as scientific landscapes. John Ruskin, who was, again, when Turner died, he transferred his patronage, if you like, latterly to the pre-Raphaelite painters. And he said to artists, he said, and these scientific landscape painters followed this mantra. He said, "Go to nature in all singleness of heart, rejecting nothing, selecting nothing, and scorning nothing. You paint what you see." This is precise geological and botanical detail, accurately painted and drawn. Truth to nature, a juxtaposition of scientific fact and spiritual belief. And it had a symbolic reasoning, because if you painted nature, you got closer to God. Everything has a moral and ethical truth. It's moralizing to elevate society. And every leaf is depicted, or is it? And it's heightened colour. And here we come to one of the main conundrums that these artists had to confront: the difference between the general and the particular. Reynolds had cautioned against showing individual leaves and their distinctive shapes, as present in the Royal Academy in the late 18th century. But now it was fashionable, with the rise of science and botany and so on, to discriminate between different species of trees and their leaf shapes. Hobbema, the 17th century Dutch landscape artist, was criticised by Reynolds. He said, "They can paint oak leafage faithfully, but do not know where to stop, and by doing too much lose the truth of all, lose the very truth of detail of which they aim. For all their minute work only gives 2 leaves to nature's 20. He said, in putting so much detail, they lost the harmony and repose of nature. Turner's trees, he loved Turner. Turner's trees, he said, are just right, evidence of careful study from nature, but not spoiling its harmony and mystery through excessive detail. For, he said, foliage will not be imitated. It must be reasoned out and suggested. We cannot learn to paint leaves by painting trees full, nor grass by painting fields full. Learning to paint one leaf rightly is better than constructing a whole forest of leaf definition. Ruskin said that artists could concentrate on ramification, which is the branch structure. Only Turner, he said, could paint the stem of a tree. If you can paint one leaf, you can paint the world, and few artists can do it. Well, now we enter the modern movement, and this man here is one of the most important British artists of the first half of the 20th century, died in 1942. He is no tree painter, but we shall see how he's important in my story. Walter Richard Sickert, born 1860, son of a Danish artist, born in Munich. His first career as an actor fails, so he goes to Plan B, becomes an artist. He enters the Slade School of Art, meets Whistler in the street, who says, don't waste your time and money going to Slade, come and be my assistant. And so he becomes pupil to Whistler. And Whistler takes him to Paris, and he meets all the Impressionists, and the one that has huge impact on him is Edgar Degas, and they become firm friends until Degas' death in 1917. And and Sickert's style comes from Edgar Degas, and he teaches him how to draw and make a painting from the drawing, which he passes on to the younger generation. He's one of only 2 truly British Impressionists, the other being Philip Wilson Steer. And after the London Impressionist exhibition in 1889, which was a commercial and critical flop, and Sickert's first marriage fails, he's publicly slighted by Whistler in the street. He decides to abandon Britain and goes across the Channel to settle down in Dieppe to paint the town's architecture in 1898. He stays there about 7 years. He meets, fortuitously, the young Spencer Frederick Gore, who's on a painting holiday with Albert Rotherston. They get on famously, even though there's a large disparity in age. And Gore persuades Sickert to come back to England to lead the new avant-garde. He said there's lots of young artists at Slade interested in French developments, post-impressionism, which the Royal Academy, the New English Art Club would have no truck with. And they wanted someone to lead to hold the flag, to lead the new avant-garde, and Sickert is the man. In 1905, he comes back to London, sets up studio in Camden Town, because he's become interested in painting shabby interiors with nudes or semi-clothed models against the light, contre-jour, and starts to have at-homes, bringing in young artists and patrons to buy pictures. One patron says, little pictures for little patrons. No picture costs more than supper at the Savoy. And he's promoting these young artists. And after Roger Fry's infamous or famous Manet in the Post-Impressionist exhibition in 1910, when London for the first time sees the post-impressionists, that's Cézanne, Van Gogh, and Gauguin, Matisse, and so on, in large numbers, and they're horrified of this new modern art, which they hate. They say it's not art at all. The Royal Academy and the New English Art Club no longer allow these artists to show there. So they invent their own public platform for selling art, their own society, which becomes known as the Camden Town Group. 16 members in total, only males, because Sickert and Harold Gilman say, we'll come on to women artists in a minute, there are very few professional women artists. They didn't want them diluted with amateur art, a bit controversial at the time. They only had 3 exhibitions, one in 1911, 2 in 1912, and by 1913 it was pretty much dead in the water because all their shows were commercial flops, and they had to enlarge, and they became the London Group in 1914, which is still going today, and I am very proud to say that I'm a member of that myself. And the first president of the Camden Town Group is Spencer Frederick Gore. This, in a way, the Camden Town Group, it can be described as a middle-class achievement because these artists had to have money to travel to Paris, the capital of the avant-garde world. So Spencer Gore went to Spain, others went to Paris and so on, and brought back these ideas, which is quite hard at the time. No internet, of course, in those days. Spencer Gore went to Harrow, so his father was Bishop of Oxford, and when they showed all their nude paintings, his uncle was going to come to the studios, they had to hide all the nudes away. And he was a very great diplomat, and he married and moved to Richmond and had a son, Freddie Gore, who became an artist, wasn't a Royal Academician. I did actually meet him. But these artists had to go through 30 years of development of post-impressionism, in about 3 years, trying all these different styles out. And by the time, the early style of Spencer Gore is Lucien Pissarro, another member of the Camden Town Group, Camille Pissarro's eldest son, who came to Britain, became a well-known printmaker. He knew Sickert, so he was the link to the Impressionists, which these young artists clung to. But for a number of them, the tree was a motif that they could use to develop their style. And this is a view of Richmond Park by Spencer Gore. And early in 1914, he was out in Richmond Park painting trees in the rain. He got flu, got pneumonia, and died. Hugely tragic. We lost a great artist very young. And this is inspired by Cézanne, this work. It's in Manchester, I think. Another of the Camden Towners is Charles Ginner, one of my favourites. Born in Cannes, south of France, with British parents, trains in an architect's office in Paris, and also the École des Beaux-Arts, the famous French art college. And he discovers Van Gogh. He's the man who brings Van Gogh to England. You can see this homage in this Victoria Embankment painting in London. It's very stylized. It doesn't go here again, but he's using the tree stylistically a la Van Gogh. And he dies in 1952. His great friend is probably the most talented of the Camden Towners. And what you see here is the pastel shades of the Camden Towners. So they're using French modern ideas and stylistic devices with English sensibility, English compromise, and English weather. So rather than the very strong colours of the fauves like Matisse and Blancmange, the red and the green and the yellow straight out of the tubes, they add white. So you have these pastel shades, very distinctive of the Camden Towners. They're gorgeous things. They're quite synthetic. So Harold Gilman is born in Kent. His father's a rector of Snargate. His early paintings are inspired by Manet, goes to the Slade, and we're sort of quite dark Edwardian, but then he meets up with his fellow Camden Towners like Ginner and discovers Van Gogh and Cézanne, and his painting becomes more vivid, more dramatic, more colourful, more impastoed. And in 1917, he visits his friend Hubert Wellington in Gloucestershire, where he paints a series of amazing beech tree subjects, of which this is one. And in 1919, he goes down with what we describe now as, erroneously, the Spanish flu, which killed millions across Europe, across the world. And first of all, his great friend Charles Ginner went down with the flu, and Gilman came to nurse him. He got the flu as well. They were both in bed side by side. Gilman dies in 1919, huge tragedy, and Ginner survives isolated until 1952. So it's a huge tragedy that we lost our great, the most talented of these painters. What he might have achieved had he lived. And finally, the Camden Towners. This is a lithograph of Robert Bevan. Again, I say middle class. Bevan, good Welsh name, he could trace his ancestors back to the Welsh princes of Glamorgan, but they came to Lombard Street in the 17th century and went into banking. So the firm was known in the 18th century as Barclays, Bevan, Tritton and Company. So all the senior Bevan people were Barclays directors. But Robert Bevan here gets his artistic gene from his mother's side, goes to Winchester College where he only survived, still academic, he only survives a term there. He's sent, because he's going to be an artist, and his father had money, he was director of the Brighton Bank. He was sent to Paris, the centre of French art. And he goes to Académie Julienne, where lots of foreign artists went to go and train in the modern French method. He goes down to Pont-Devant, if you like, the French St. Ives, the artist colony on the sea, cheap living, lovely light, and so on, where Gauguin is ensconced. He meets Gauguin, and he meets Renoir, and he is probably leading the British avant-garde in 1903, painting almost fauve paintings in Poland, where he has a Polish wife. The only language he has in common with his father-in-law is Latin. Anyway, he's so in love with his Stanisława that he goes and finds her in Poland and marries her. And he's so lambasted and castigated by his avant-garde work that he retreats from it. This is a later work in the Blackdown Hills in Somerset, on the Somerset-Devon border. And he turned some of his paintings into lithographs later on, so it's reversed from the painting. This is his best tree painting. I love it. And you can see he's experimenting with cubist-style shapes here. He retreats from that, but you can see how the shapes of the tree are so useful for him in developing his style. He tragically dies in 1925 of stomach cancer, and he was treasurer of the London Group, having the sort of banking background. I did actually find a cycat tree. I was so shocked and amazed that I took a little detailed photograph. So this is quite a rare landscape painting by cycat, and that's what a cycat tree looks like. Never seen another one. So this is my first painting you're seeing tonight by a women artist. It comes quite late on. In fact, Sylvia Goss here is not a tree painter. This is in Southampton City Art Gallery. It's called Front Garden Dieppe. She had borrowed Cycat's French house in Dieppe and gone and painted there. Nevertheless, we have a tree by women artists, because by this time, women are starting to become professionals, and it accelerates further on and becomes thick and fast later on. This is probably the most famous painting of the First World War by Paul Nash. He went to Slade School of Art. He wasn't very good at figures, Paul Nash, so he was told to go in for landscape. When World War I broke out, he joined the Artists' Rifles, which was an organisation formed up in the 1860s when we were expecting a French invasion, because Britain had a small standing army, lots of volunteer organisations set up, having regiments, and the artists said, well, we'll have one. So people like William Morris and so were marching up and down outside the Royal Academy. And by the time of the First World War, the Artists' Rifles were still in existence. And the army, being the army, thought, well, if they're artists, they must be educated. That is officer stuff. So although a lot of artists entered the Artists' Rifles, they were trained to be officers and then moved on to other regiments. And Paul Nash joined the Hampshire Regiment. But he was out in the Ypres salient in 1916. For about 3 months, he fell in a huge shell hole and dislocated his hip, so he was taken back to London, so he never saw action. His brother, John, did. He went over the top when the Artists' Rifles did, the first and only time, but survived it. The first war paintings made in the First World War were very anachronistic. They were jingoistic, religious. They were out of time. But the young artists who'd been trained at the Slade and other schools of art, who were in the trenches, started to make art and bring them back and show them in London. The public started to set up a notice, and this became apexed when Eric Kennington showed his The Kensingtons at Laventille in 1916. This was picked up by Charles Masterman, who was head of British propaganda, and he thought, I can harness this for the British war effort. And he started the first official war art scheme in 1917. And Paul Nash was one of the first British war artists. And he went out and made a series of extraordinary works, of which this is the Tate, is We Are Making a New World. And he writes later, he said, the rain drives on, the stinking mud becomes more evilly yellow, the shell holes fill up with green-white water, the roads and tracks are covered in inches of slime, the black, dying trees ooze and sweat, and the shells never cease. It is unspeakable, godless, hopeless. I am no longer an artist, interested and curious. I am a messenger who will bring back word from the men who are fighting to those who want the war to go on forever. Feeble, inarticulate will be my message, but it will have a bitter truth and may it burn their lousy souls. Powerful stuff. And here you see the limbless trees are a metaphor for the human condition. The synergy between humanity, the animal kingdom, and trees is quite powerful. This is one of my favourite works in Southampton City Art Gallery. Again, it's Paul Nash, and it's Art Deco, isn't it? These speed lines, canal banks, with trees again being the motif for these lovely design shapes. Paul Nash said, I love and worship trees and believe they are people. It's one of the Arborealists' mantras, one of our sayings that we love. So in 1880, the young Freddie Griggs discovered Samuel Palmer's late eclogue etchings, which I mentioned earlier on, in the Hitchin Mechanical Institute as a young lad. And it knocked him out. Light bulb went on. He said, I'm going to do etching. That's going to be my life. I love these things. And he becomes a master etcher later on. And together with Samuel Palmer's son, A.H. Palmer, who had the big bonfire, who actually had kept 5 remaining plates of Palmer's etchings, they made reprints, they made new versions. Griggs becomes a Catholic convert. He moves to Chipping Campden in 1903, which is like the headquarters of the arts and crafts movement, not far from Kelscott Manor, which is where William Morris had his house. And he forms the Camden Trust to conserve vernacular architecture. And he makes a series of etchings which hark back to a medieval pastoral England in response to the horrors of World War II, of what England would have looked like without Henry VIII's Reformation and the abolition of the monasteries. He said, where all was peace, labour was sweet, dignified, and its own reward, and the Catholic Church spread its canopy over all. He was yearning for Blake's green and pleasant land, subconscious expression of national identity at times of national crisis, but the air is stifling. This coincides with what's called the etching revival in England in the 1920s, and especially through Goldsmith College. It's called the Class of 21, including this artist, Paul Drury. You can see his initials down there, of this woodland scene. And it includes Graham Sutherland, who we'll come on to a bit later. But a quote from Graham Sutherland will set the scene. He says, if I can find it. There we are. The day on which one of our band, William Larkins, bought a small Palmer etching which he had found on Charing Cross Road was a turning point. I was amazed by its completeness, with both emotional and technical. It was unheard of at school to cover the plate almost completely with work, and quite new to us that the complex variety and multiplicity of line could form a tone of such luminosity. This is by Robin Tanner, another of the pastoral lectures, Class of 21. You can see the Samuel Palmer intense depth spiritual treatment of the subject matter, and finally Graham Sutherland. He made 40 etchings a la Palmer in this style of trees there. Cray Fields, this one. Paul Nash was one of his tutors, and this later work of 1929 is different. Suddenly, you will see that instead of the beauty, tranquility, and fecundity of nature, it's overtaken now with death and decay. These are new emotions coming in. This is different. It's much simpler. 1929. So the etching revival suddenly disappears almost in a day with the Wall Street crash, because the big market for these etchings was in the USA. And with the Wall Street crash, it just killed it completely dead. And the etching revival fell to the ground, and Sutherland turned to oil painting. By this time, of course, the women artists were starting to coming to appear. Gertrude Hermes is a brilliant etcher, and especially this work here by Monica Poole. There's a bit more design around it. It's a lovely work, very lyrical, very technically brilliant work. In 1930, Nash's wife gives him a camera, and he delights in this and takes rather sort of surreal photographs all over the place, staying at their friends at Dimmock, South Gloucestershire, just below the Morven Hills. He discovered this field close by, full of fallen trees, and he calls it Monster Field. And these have slightly sort of surreal qualities, and these are like dark agencies, of creatures crawling across the landscape, about to bring horror to us, portents of evil, if you like. In 1928, he sees an exhibition in Tooth's Gallery in London by Giorgio de Chirico, a sort of prototype surrealist of his famous metaphysical paintings of townscapes in Italy. And what he saw in de Chirico, what de Chirico gave, was he gave sort of unseen, rather frightening portents to ordinary objects. And he made figures still and objects come alive. And that's what Nash took. Because he says to himself, I want to be a modern artist, but I'm a landscape painter. How can I be modern? He did it through surrealism and through this idea of giving essence or giving life to objects. And one of his most famous paintings involves a tree trunk in the Tate. Event on the Downs, it's called, with this curious tennis ball type thing and this animated trunk amidst a British landscape. So the English surrealists are very different from their continental counterparts because they bring in landscape. Again, it's back to Turner and Constable. It's that, you can't divorce yourself from the landscape painting. It's more frivolous and humorous and not as political as the continental version. And this is Nash and his surreal time. Poor old Nash, he was either ill with bronchial asthma. He died very young in 1946, sadly, broke or depressed. So it's extraordinary that he produced the amount of work that he did. One of Britain's most famous, best landscape painter of the last century. In 1938, Penrose brings Picasso's biographer brings Guernica to England, which he'd painted in 1937, famously during the Spanish Civil War, the bombing by the Luftwaffe of the mass bombing of the town of Guernica in Spain. Extraordinarily large painting. I've seen it in the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid. And Penrose his biographer wanted to bring it to England, which has caused quite a difficulty. He got it here. It was shown in London and also in Manchester. The only place they could find in Manchester was a car showroom. It was a big enough place to show it. This was seen by Graham Sutherland and had a huge impact on him. And he could see that he could put emotion into landscape features by distorting the forms and bring emotive power to his subjects with stylistic distortions. He first went to Pembrokeshire in 934, which he described as exultant strangeness. Pembroke's full of small fields, outcrops of rocks, the seaside, which is quite surreal. It's quite a strange, different type of environment, which he loved. And there he would paint and draw a series of extraordinary roots and tree forms, writhing in agony like this, like this one here, because this is the 1930s. The rise of fascism, war is coming, anxiety, worry, it's not good. And this is expressed in these paintings, and the tree is a motif for it. In 1942, the critic Raymond Mortimer invents the name Neo-Romanticism. This is a painting by John Craxton, again tree form. It's a new cross-fertilization of native and international traditions. The English neo-romantics were looking two ways. They were looking back to Turner and Constable, Samuel Palmer and William Blake, and forward to Picasso, Max Ernst and Otto Dix, a mixture of Turner and Constable with expressionism, abstraction and surrealism. They went to the same sites as Turner and Constable, and these paintings had significance beyond the visual. It was about the cycle of nature, genius loci, the passage of time, spirituality, identity and individuality. They shared, although they had no shared manifesto or exhibitions together at the time, they shared stylistic elements which were curiously similar, including thick linear outlines, as you see here, emotive distortion, a la Picasso, dense dark surfaces, luxuriant foliage, strange organic forms, moons often appeared, listless, anxious, solitary figures, often poets, drama and mystery. But the giveaway for neo-romantic work are the spiky shapes. You can't miss it. The neo-romantics were criticized by some as being insular, it's wartime, escapist and reactionary, and parochial. Post-war artists rejected looking back to the past. But it's the last sort of try, it was the last go at landscape before the modern movement takes hold again, which just becomes much more urban. By Michael Ayrton, it's called Entrance to a Wood. He loved history, he loved Greek myth, he was a sculptor as well as a writer, wrote art historical books as well as a painter. And this is very spiky, isn't it? Very Picasso. It's called Entrance to Wood. It's in the Government Art Collection, and it's painted in Southampton. He was in Southampton looking at the Roman archaeology there at the time during the war. And he's giving the idea that trees bear witness. Southampton had been heavily bombed because of the Spitfire factories there. Trees register suffering. Wartime bombing was, a big thing. And bombed buildings became quite a popular subject and cultural imagery during World War II. In fact, a book called The Bombed Buildings of Britain by J.M. Richards went to 2 editions because it was so popular. It's a badge of honour for a regional city to be bombed out, if you like. We are taking the punishment. We can take it. It's about the aesthetics of melancholy, which is very beautiful. It's beautiful but tragic, which this depicts, I think, quite well. You can see the horror and anxiety mixed up in this powerful painting of a tree. On the other end of the scale, we have Ivan Hitchens. He was bombed out of London, actually, and he moves just north of Chichester, buys a plot of land, puts a caravan in there later on, and this painting is in Southampton. It's called Oak Tree in Purple Woods. In fact, John Hitchens, his son, remembers playing in this tree. He told me quite recently. And he was a different type of neo-romantic. He painted abstract shapes, expressive simplified forms, leaving lots of white canvas, sometimes described as the 20th century Constable, but there's energy and there's emotion in his paintings. As a contrast, we have Victor Passmore, an urban artist. This is quite an unusual painting by Passmore, and he, together with William Coldstream and Claude Rogers, founded the Euston Road School in 1937. They, Coldstream and Rogers, trained the Slade. They turned to portraiture to make their living. Coldstream had worked with a GPO film unit. They were quite socialist in their nature. They wanted an art that was objective realism, art for the masses. They were against the School of Paris, the subjective brushstrokes and the flourish. They wanted to make themselves into machines to record exactly what they could see. So they measured things. You've probably seen artists, looking down pencils and making little marks and so on. And you can see on this there are little measuring marks where he's measured where the tree actually is. Not the actual distance, but proportional difference. So one distance might be twice another one. So the marks are put in. And in between, the paint is put on very thinly, often quite drab colours, vertically. So there were no artistic flourishes. But Passmore, who was self-taught, his father died young, so he had to go out to work. He was a civil servant. He went to art school. He was such a brilliant artist. He could paint anything. Very eclectic. He sort of sucked it all in. But he joined the Euston Road School and painted in this very straight-jacketed style. There are artists still doing this now, to be honest. It's quite popular. If you were taught by one of these artists and you went to go and teach, you taught this style. It's called proportional measurement, yes, it's called proportional measurement. But inside him, he wanted to escape this straitjacket of doing all this measurement. So in 1941, he starts to go abstract. There's a series of paintings across in London during the war along the Thames embankment where he's starting to bring in design and using his imagination. He's not painting what he sees. And he's using little stars, the trees become sort of spirally shapes. And 10 years later on, he goes fully abstract. This is 1951, 10 years on. He's seen Paul Klee. This is a Klee-inspired abstract painting. But look, the tree's still here. Vestiges of the spiral. That's the tree, still there. But the most famous of the artists who used the tree to go abstract, he's not British, but he's so good, I couldn't leave him out, is Piet Mondrian, who starts, Dutch artist, who starts life out as a post-impressionist tree painter. And stylistically, he brings in abstraction. And slowly he's gone to cubism here. It's a step on the path, it's not the finished article. And you end up with full distil. So the last living English surrealist, Desmond Morris, who's 97, still painting, extraordinary, because English surrealism shuts the door down in 1950, and he's a zoology student at Birmingham University in 1948, sits at Conrad Maddox's knee, Conrad Maddox being the famous Birmingham surrealist, and he starts to exhibit with the surrealist movement as a teenager, and he's still going. It's extraordinary. He told me, because he's a very knowledgeable guy, that what's happened here is that Mondrian has gone inside the tree. Because if you take a sliver of tree and put it under the microscope, you get the cell structure, and it looks like that. So this is neoplastic art. It's about idealism. Art, he says, is higher than reality, although his art remains based in nature. Neoplastism is about is creating a universal beauty. He's using 3 primary colours and black, grey and white. Very simple, very urban, using vertical and horizontal lines. A bit further on now, we come to the land artists. So this is Andy Goldsworthy. And the land artists arrived in around the late 1960s. And the protagonists are Richard Long, the most famous of them, Hamish Fulton and Andy Goldsworthy. And it's a mixture of conceptual art, ideas, conceptualism, and the landscape. But instead of making drawings of the landscape and putting them in a gallery, they're taking bits of the landscape themselves into the gallery, arranging them in elemental and simple forms like circles of stones or slate, or lines of twigs and so on. Goldsworthy he uses his hands and his teeth and found objects as his tools to make his art in situ, and he'll take a photograph. And the other element, the medium of land art for many, especially Richard Long, is just walking. He made walking into art. But he used mathematics, so he might walk a straight line for 10 miles. He might do a circular walk, exactly circular, 5 miles. And he'd document that with photographs. They were trying to beat the art market. They failed, but they were anti the gallerists and the owners making all this money. They wanted with conceptual art, they tried to beat it, but internationally famous, and they're worth a lot of money now, so they failed with that. Goldsworthy uses coloured flowers, icicles, leaves, mud, pine cones, snow, twigs and thorns. He said, I think it's incredibly brave to be working with flowers and leaves, but I have to. I can't edit the materials I work with. My remit is to work with nature as a whole. Photography plays a crucial role, a part of his work. And he says each work grows, stays, decays, integral parts of a cycle, which the photograph shows at its heights, marking the moment when the work is most active. There is an intensity about a work at its peak that I hope is expressed in the image. Process and decay are implicit. Art for me is a form of nourishment. I need the land, I need it. And now, on the edges of land art is David Nash. You probably all know the Ash Dome, which is on BBC TV as a sort of wallpaper on, I think, BBC 4. Nash lives and works in North Wales. Born in Brighton, went to Kingston Chelsea College of Art. He actually worked in forestry. His tools are, he works with wood and worked with trees all his life as a sculptor. His tools are the axe, the chainsaw, and the blowtorch, because he chars his wood. But he makes site-specific works, but also, there's a sculpture in Southampton City Art Gallery, for instance. His shapes are the cube, the sphere, and the pyramid. He uses unseasoned wood, so it all moves around and cracks. That's part of the process. And he uses vertical, horizontal, and diagonal marks. He planted the Ash Dome here in 1977 in a secret location in Snowdonia. And when he takes visitors and film crews there, he blindfolds them so they don't know where it is. As a little aside to that, when Hockney had his famous totem painting, which is outside Billington, where he lives in North Yorkshire, that was not hidden away, and it was vandalised because it could be. So it's gone. So he's right to do that. He said, when I first planted a ring of 22 ash trees in 1977, the Cold War was still a threat. There was serious economic gloom, very high unemployment in our country, and nuclear war was a real possibility. We were killing the planet, which we still are because of greed, and the land artists were early environmentalists. To make a gesture by planting something for the 21st century, which was what the Ash Dome was really about, was like a long-term commitment, an act of faith. And I think they die. I think there's a problem with their health. This is a work by Charlie Poulton, who works in Berger, just across the Scottish border. And his patron, who lived at Marchmont Manor, Hugo Borge, saw this idea in a drawing, this sketchbook, and he said, I've got the money, would you like to realise it? Wow, said Charlie, yes, please. Cost quite a bit of money. So what we have here is it's put out in the Marchmont Manor grounds, which is quite extensive. What we have here is a fishing boat hiked on a trestle here. Underneath, they planted 5 oak saplings. This is a living sculpture, a bit like the Ash Dome. One day, they're going to take the trestle away, and the tree will be lifted into the air by the trees. It's an act of faith. Charlie will never see it, probably. Just as the first Earl of Marchmont, when he built his house, and he built this avenue of trees, the longest in Scotland, 1.3 miles, it was an act of faith. The first Earl knew he'd never see it to fruition. It's quite extraordinary. It's a bit like a sculpture itself. So, getting near the end now. In 1974, the celebrated pop artist, Peter Blake, and his American artist wife, Jan Howarth, together they designed Sgt. Pepper album cover, and their family moved to a converted railway station in Wellow near Bath. Blake goes to Bristol Museum and Art Gallery. He sees an exhibition in the basement by a group calling themselves the Broadheath Brotherhood. Broadheath being the birthplace of Elgar, so romantic. Works by John and Diana Morley, David Inshaw, who is there, and Graham and Anne Arnold. And he's knocked out by the show. It's all a bit romantic. And he says, I want to meet these artists and I want to join their group. On March the 21st, 1935, he has a big dinner party. He invites Inshaw, Graham and Anne Arnold, and Graham Ovenden and Annie Ovenden. This painting was painted, by the way, by Anne Arnold, who's since sadly died. That's Annie Ovenden, that's Graham Ovenden. At a big party. It was David Inshaw's birthday, and that night they formed the Brotherhood of Ruralists. In 1976, Blake, being a Royal Academician, had a big show, hit the headlines, hugely successful, and they had major shows all over the country. Had one in the Arnold Feeney in Bristol, and they said, simply our aims are the continuation of a certain kind of English painting. This is a last spike of romantic art in Britain, kicking against contemporary painting, abstraction, conceptualism, and so on, because they thought art had lost its way. We admire Samuel Palmer, Stanley Spencer, Thomas Hardy, Elgar, Cricket, English landscape, the Pre-Raphaelites. Our aims are to paint about love, beauty, joy, sentiment and magic. We will believe in painting with oil paint on canvas, putting the picture in a frame, and hopefully that someone will like it, buy it, and hang it on their wall to enjoy. In 1977, the BBC did a film, Somewhere the Brotherhood. John Reed was the director. And if it goes on the media, on the TV, suddenly you're famous. So they became very popular commercially, but the art establishment criticised them heavily. They said it's anti-modernist, it's narrative, it's looking nostalgia, it's sentimental. The Arborealists admitted sentiment, but they said it's not nostalgic because we believe the past has a strong relationship to the present rather than distance from it, which is what nostalgia is about. But they had a very popular time in the 1970s. And I must admit, I'd just come out of art college, and my head was full of minimalism, conceptualism, and so on. And my head was turned by these artists because they were good paintings, and they were painting trees. So this is probably the most famous of David Inshaw's painting. He lives in Devizes, and the famous critic David Lambert, who moved to Devizes from East Anglia, has described him as the greatest living romantic artist, though I gather that this time his health is not good. This is in the Tate, the badminton game, with these great, lovely sculptured trees. This is a work by Graham Arnold. He sadly died some years ago. He was a member of the Arborealists, so was Anne Arnold, and I wanted them in because they were an art historical link. I wanted that legacy. A lot of his stuff's is autobiographical, so these boxes down are about his life, autobiographical, but he'd do trees. And if I wanted a painting off him for a tree exhibition, I'd say, come on, Graham, can I have another tree? And he'd do one for me. And Annie Ovenden lives down in Lostwithiel. She was trained in illustration, but her main subject is trees. And she is an arborealist. She's still showing with us. So I have that link still going on. Now, just to finish off, very quickly, in 2013, I staged, with a couple of co-curators, an exhibition, double exhibition, at St Barbe Museum and Art Gallery in Lymington, heart of the New Forest, on trees. And it was part one was historic, it was called Under the Greenwood. Part one was past, so it was the John Constable Wright suit and the Romantics. Part two was contemporary, which I curated. There were 33 artists, and I said I want to be in it myself. And we had 2 RAs and a Turner Prize shortlistee among it. I knew I wanted one work per artist to show a huge diverse range of approach, scale, medium, style, philosophy, with the coat hanger of the tree as the unifying factor. It was a great success. At the opening, I asked it was just for me, it was a start, not an end. I asked all the artists who came to the opening, do you want to keep going, keep showing together? They all said yes. So I had to find a venue for an inaugural show. Oh, I wanted David Hockney in it, but he never lends. I tried his agent, but he would not lend, because he'd made trees famous just a year or two before with his famous exhibition at the Royal Academy. You may remember it's called A Bigger Picture, where he painted lots of trees. So that was good for the good publicity. I managed to. I asked Alison Bevan, director of the Royal Western England Academy in Bristol, if she'd do a tree show. She said, "Oh, it's all about timing," because she said, "Oh yes, next year Bristol is European Green City, so that ticks our boxes. We'll have a tree show." And this is it. We had 5 Royal Western Academicians as well. It was a beautiful looking show, and it hit the public press. The Times said it's a show we'd pay to go and see, and the Telegraph called it stunning. It was good. And suddenly, I had lots of people wanting to join. My colleague, Philippa Beale, who made a name as a conceptual feminist art in the 80s, was painting trees. She said, let's call ourselves the Arborealists, because I want to show in France. I've got a house in France, and it translates into French. We've had 2 shows in France, 1 in Gibraltar. So we've been going now since 2014. We've done a number of site-specific projects. This is Lady Park Wood on the banks of the River Wye near Monmouth, and this is George Peterkin, OBE, expert on natural woodland, published lots of books. He invited us to show there. It's owned by the Forest Commission, and it's the only scientifically monitored, unmanaged woodland in the country. Lots of fallen trees there. So the woodland hasn't been touched for 200 years. So they take experts and students, and they say, this is what happens if you do nothing. We had a book, I've got the book here on it, he wrote about the artists, and we did trees on Exmoor and Dartmoor, with both national parks as partners, and we're just about to do Stavden Park in Suffolk. So we do like to go out and do site-specific work too. And we are now, in fact, this was our show in this spring at Sculpture by the Lakes Gallery, amazing place, near Dorchester, very successful, they want to go back in 2 years. Our 40th exhibition. We're now on our 42nd, we're going around the hospitals. So it's a juggernaut. And it's because we're on the front of the curve of the ecological. I mean, most museums in this country now are doing eco shows. It's so fashionable. And art, if it's anything, it's about fashion. And we got in front of it because the tree is the symbol of our fragile environment. And that's why everybody wants to do tree shows. Thank you.
Gosh, we're going to take one or two questions. I think we've just got about time for some questions, but just reflecting on that fantastic journey through trees in British art, a real journey through British art history through the trees. You gave us a couple from Richmond Park, didn't you, John Martin and Spencer Gore, to make us Richmond Park fans happy. I can't believe it. Did we go from outside the tree to inside the tree?
Yep.
That we really did, didn't we?
Yep.
Yes. So we can take one or two questions. We have got people with roving mics, and we can take one or two online if people online want to go on the Q&A or the chat. How are we doing?
I was stunned into silence.
Well, maybe you stunned them into silence. I'm looking. Maybe we. No. Do we have anything? Where's our roving Malin? Yes.
I'm sitting next to somebody who has done some beautiful photographs, lots of beautiful photographs of the trees in Richmond Park. And I wondered if you could say something about the relationship between photography and trees and the impact that the photograph had on the way in which artists depict trees.
So a question on the relationship between photography and art on trees, and you're sitting next to Eric, who does our fantastic tree photographs.
Well, the difference between the different media are blurring now. I mean, most artists will work in a lot of artists now will work in film, photography, painting, drawing. They do everything. And I made a conscious decision right at the beginning not to include photographers in the group. We have shown with photographers, we've shown with guest artists, and that might change because we are now formalised. We have a constitution. It's like future-proofing because once the king is dead, if you like, then things fall apart. But with a constitution, an elected committee, and a treasurer, everything is democratic with us, and we elect associates because people want to apply to join. And one day we may accept photographers because we're democratic, if that's what the group wants. There is a huge relationship between photography and painting, and I'm particularly interested because when I was at art college, I saw the figurative, a lot of abstraction and conception at that time in the 70s. The figurative style coming along was photorealism, so actually artists painting directly photographs, which is what my stuff is related to. So I've always worked with photographs. Some of the artists will use them as aid memoirs. Some, like me, will use them directly and in other ways. We've had films made as well for the Arborealists. So it's right in there. Photography is hugely important, yeah.
It's an interesting question because actually the Friends have done a lot with photographs of Richmond Park, and Eric and others, and through the calendar, the Christmas cards and our greeting cards. And so one of the purposes of this was actually to think about art as well as photography as a way of thinking about trees in Richmond Park?
Oh, photography is art.
Photography.
But when the first photographers emerged, they tried to make their work look like paintings. Quite interesting. You know, there's this backwards and forwards. And of course, artists have always used aids. I mean, even people like Vermeer were using optical aids. You can spot how they do it. But they wouldn't, you know, secret process you wouldn't be allowed to know about until the photorealists openly. But they scale up, they do all sorts of other things to make it interesting, the one-to-one relationship. But no, it's. I mean, people thought that painting would be dead when photography came along, but absolutely opposite.
Right. Any other questions? I'm looking up. Anything online from the Q&A or the chat? We've got one. Looks like one at the back.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, a tree is a living thing until it's dead, and it's a subject for art and artists and photographers. But some of the tree products that you showed are actually dead wood. At what point does timber stop becoming a subject for art?
I don't think it ever does. We've shown with sculptors as well, where they use trees and scoop out, you know, make. It's such an extraordinary thing and substance, and so the synergy with humanity in the animal kingdom, we're learning more and more. We know that they talk to each other, that they can support each other. They also compete like humanity, and that they have a primitive brain. I mean, for instance, have you noticed the amount of acorns we've got now? That's because of the drought. The trees thinking, we better reproduce because, you know, danger. And that's why there's a lot of fruit around. Extraordinary. So they have to think, they have to know where to throw out a branch. So, and that's why it's such an amazing subject for art, because it's so close. You know, Paul Nash and his quote about "I believe they are people." It's so close. And the way you can use a tree, because trees go with anything. We had a show last year on ancient trees. You know, so there's so many different ways you can play the subject. It's much more, I think, more exciting and diverse than simple portraiture, if you like. So there's no time at all when we can use it in any way we want, including lots of dead wood. Yeah.
Okay. We've got one more, just at the front.
Would it be possible to have a list of the artists that you've mentioned in the talk?
It would be possible. I'd have to put it together. Was there anything in particular that I thought it was a bit fast? It's a roller coaster. I apologise.
I didn't have a chance, and everything was all interesting. So just a list of the names, really, and
Okay.
maybe the paintings that you.
I mean, I can produce a list which can go out.
That's very kind.
Oh, in fact, this has been recorded.
We are recording, so we hope we can make it available to people
Okay.
afterwards. So give another opportunity.
Great, thank you.
Can I just check at the back? Is there anything in the online? No, there's nothing up. I might draw questions to a close. Unless I see one more. No. So I'm going to finish with a few words. First of all, though, thank you, Tim, for a fantastic tour through British art. I just want to say a few more words. First of all, some thank yous to the artists who brought your displays. I mean, at the end of your talk, Tim, you were showing us some exhibitions. Well, I think you brought you weren't just telling us about exhibitions, you brought some with us. So thank you to Naheem Shah, John Blandy, Natasha Lean, Annabelle Cullen and Linda Minter for bringing those. Opportunity afterwards to have another look at those. Linda is leading an art walk for us on Saturday, so there's an opportunity for 1 or 2 people to join that. Just come and chat to me and I'll tell you how you can do that. A few more thank yous to Monique Sakani and Vivian Press, for 2 trustees of the Friends, for coming up with a concept of appreciating Richmond Park through art and then developing that idea. Thank you to all the Friends volunteers here tonight. I hope I'm getting this right, but I've got Jackie, Patricia, Annick, Derek, Maylin, Hugh, Maggie, Alison, Simon, Robert. Thank you. I mean, these things don't just happen. Thank you for that. Beavering away while I talk. A special thank you to Vivian Press, who conceived of and organised this evening's event. So thank you, Vivian. Thank you for all coming tonight. This is the first time we've done an event like this for a while, so happy to receive your feedback. For those here in Duke Street, not online, the evening is not yet over. Another chance to see the art exhibitions. Do come down from the balcony to admire them. We've got a display about the activities of the Friends. Many of you are members of the Friends, but if you're not, this is a wonderful opportunity to join the Friends of Richmond Park, which is the most fantastic community of people who love Richmond Park. And we've got leaflets showing you how you can join. A lot of people think you have to volunteer. No, you don't. A small subsection of our members do extraordinary volunteering in the visitor centre and conservation and campaigning. But most of our members are people who just love Richmond Park and want to support it. So do take a leaflet and join there. We've got a mobile visitor centre we call with our beautiful calendar 2026, which is already selling really well, Christmas cards, and the Royal Oak print, which is an art print we commissioned in the Friends a few years ago. And we've got some wine ready, so do join us for a drink of wine. And Tim, you're around for a bit to chat.
Can I, if you're doing merchandise,
Right. Yes.
You can get this book. We've done 9 publications. This are later on. Forest, Woods and Groves you can get on through Amazon and Waterstones. Lovely publication. Under Greenwood, that's quite rare now, the first tree show exhibition. The first publication, because I wanted a publication because it opens doors for you. You can show these to gallery curators and they, ooh, yes. So that was the first one, 2016. That was the George Peterkin book, Art Meets Ecology, where a scientist talks about the works of art from a scientist's point of view, quite interesting. So we've got stuff to read as well. Thank you.
So merchandise from Tim, merchandise to the Friends of Richmond Park, glass of wine. Please join us. But most of all, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for a very good evening. Thank you. Excellent.